10 conference championship games. I've got an interesting stat for you on each and every single one. I've also got the great Adam Trigger joining me here on a Tuesday. Welcome to the Hustle Pod. I am, of course, Brian Power, like it says there on the bottom of the screen. And today, Trig and I are here to help you get prepared for Conference Championship Week. Trig, I cannot believe there is snow on the ground here as I look out my window. I cannot believe bowl season is nearly upon us, but we've got these big games to talk about. How the heck are you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Brian. There's snow on the ground here, too. We kind of got some lake effect. I'm out in the central New York, east of Syracuse area, and we got hit with a mini lake effect blizzard today. So snow all over the place, which it's just that time of year, right? Winter bowl games. It's like that's just the first snow usually makes me think of like college bowl season because it usually happens right around the same time. And so here we are, ready to talk about championship week and get ready for the bowl season.
Yeah, bowl season. I had a great bowl season last year, 67%, looking to duplicate that this year. But, of course, there is this small matter of conference championships to be decided. I said I had an interesting stat for you on each and every one of these 10 games being played over Friday and Saturday. Interested to hear what you have to say. Let's start with the Pac-12 out in Las Vegas. This is probably the first big domino to fall in terms of the college football playoff. But from a betting perspective, Trig, by far the most interesting part of this handicap is you've got a 12-0 team from a power conference that is a 9.5-point underdog to a team it beat in the regular season. But anyone who's been following along with Washington down the stretch knows they deserve to be an underdog in this spot. A lot of close calls. And here's your interesting stat for this game, folks. In case you were wondering, there have been two previous instances of a Power 5 team, an undefeated Power 5 team, getting at least 9.5 points in a conference championship game. Those two teams were 2008 Alabama, 2020 Notre Dame. Yes, Notre Dame was part of the ACC in the COVID year. Both of those underdogs not only lost, they did not cover. So history not smiling on undefeated Washington Friday night. Any thoughts there, Trent?
Well, my thoughts are this. Like, I'm going to be meeting up with you probably a little shortly after kickoff for this game by the time I actually get down to Encore to meet you guys. And game might be over already. I really think that Oregon could completely blow out Washington. Oregon was a 5% play for me in the regular season meeting, which, of course, Washington was playing much better at that point. Extremely unfortunate to not win that game. They really should have. And then they needed to get a yard to close that win out. Mm-hmm. And as you said, Oregon has continued to get better down the stretch. Washington has continued to get worse. The line, I think this opened 8.5 and it's actually moving up. Man, I mean, I don't know if I really want to lay 10, but I'm certainly not going to take the dog here. This has like square public underdog written all over it where Oregon just houses them. That's kind of how I feel like the game is going to go. So, I guess you could lay anything up to 9.5. I don't know if this will make my client card, but I certainly like the Ducks.
Yeah, and if memory serves me correct, I talked about that 2020 game between Notre Dame and Clemson that was for the ACC title. If I remember, Notre Dame was like the squarest dog in the history of square dogs that day. New Mexico State and Liberty is a game that's probably not going to get much national attention because it is also being played on Friday. My stat here is pretty straightforward. I don't know how interesting this is, but being that most people probably don't follow Conference USA, you may be surprised to learn that only Air Force ran the ball more this season than did Liberty. And Liberty ran it better than any team in the country in terms of yards per game. 295.5 on the ground. That's after going for 441 against UTEP. Clearing out Dana Dimmel's locker, if you will, I guess. Dana, the least surprising coaching change in all the country. But Liberty, another double-digit favorite. There are several this weekend, and the first in Conference USA.
I like Liberty here. I really, to me, you go back to that early season matchup, second week of the year, these two teams played. Liberty won by 16. They probably should have won by more. 526 yards of total offense in that game. Forced 3 turnovers. I think if you dig into the stats in that game, Brian, the 16-point margin doesn't really fully do it justice. And listen, both of these teams have improved since then. But Liberty has really improved, right? This Liberty team now looks a lot better than the Liberty team we saw in September. They've done nothing wrong all year. They've won every single game. Look at the way they've won out. 13-point win over Western Kentucky, blowouts of Louisiana Tech, Old Dominion, UMass. I mean, I think this is a team that's going to keep cooking, and this is a home game. It's a Friday night home game for Liberty, not a neutral site. The place is going to be rocking, and we're getting basically the same number we were in September, except we know more now. We know Liberty is an elite group of 5 team now. We didn't know that in September. I'll be shocked if it's not a similar result.
Yeah, and Liberty could be trying to win by margin here. We'll get to the MAC champion. We'll get to some of the other group of 5, the American Conference Championship game, because Liberty's only a few spots below Tulane in the rankings. And, if they can win big here and maybe Tulane loses, who knows, maybe they get that group of 5 spot. We'll talk about some group of 5 games here in a minute. I know you broke down the Big 12 championship game. We just did that on the College Football Show with Steve Merrill. Another double-digit favorite here. This number is just absolutely going wild. I liked Texas at the opening number. Now I don't know if you can play Texas anymore. But I'll say this. Favorites have won 12 of the last 13 Big 12 title games. The under has been the big bet, though, the last 8 years, cashing 8 straight times. And this applies to several games. Here, Trig. Double-digit favorites. Not only have they won 24 straight times on Conference Championship weekend, 19 of those games were decided by 10 or more points. So, Texas, certainly history smiling on the horns.
It is. Now, there's definitely a couple underdog covers in that Big 12 title game. So some of these games have been pretty close. I want to say I think Kansas State, I can't remember if they were favored or a dog last year to TCU, but I think Baylor. Yeah, I think Baylor may have won this game as a dog a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. So, to me, you would think that this weird kickoff, the 11 a.m. local, might favor a team, a team getting a big margin like this. This is one I'm probably going to bet. I have a feeling Oklahoma State's going to be a 4%er for me, just because I'm really, the only thing I'm waiting for is to jump in at the right point. It's 15 right now. I saw a couple spots go to 15.5. I want at least 14.5, but this does feel like a spot where the line has ballooned too much, where you're getting so many key numbers with a team. I want to point this out with Oklahoma State. They tend to play up to their competition, and they tend to play down to their competition. They've beaten Oklahoma. They beat Kansas State, double-digit dog in that game. They'll play down to teams like South Alabama. The last few weeks, Houston, BYU, those aren't great teams. But you know what? This is a team that went from looking like their season was going to go completely off the rails to winning 7 of 8, with the lone loss being that letdown spot against Central Florida. So I'm going to lock this one in at some point. I'm on the Cowboys. I'm going to take the 2 touchdowns.
Well, I hear the dogs barking there in the headset, and that brings us to the MAC championship game, where the dogs have been barking in recent history, covering 6 of 7. They've won 4 of the last 5, with 3 of those being more than a field goal. Last 4 MAC title games have gone under. We've got Miami and Toledo here. These are 2 teams that you and I have talked about quite a bit on the Hustle, these Tuesday editions where we're covering the MACtion. It is a revenge spot for Miami here, while Toledo has won 11 in a row since a last-second loss to Illinois in the season opener. Mountain West title game, UNLV and Boise State. The computers decided this one, leaving San Jose State out in the cold. Very interesting. UNLV had previously finished with a winning Mountain West record, easy for me to say, just twice. Their most wins in a season, 9 this year, since 1984. SMU and Tulane, that's the American Conference Championship game. I cannot stress enough how upset I am about the Preston Stone injury. Had he played, SMU would have been a huge play for me, despite the fact, here's an interesting stat for you, 0-8 straight up, 1-7 ATS their last 8 as a dog. The favorite has won 6 straight AAC championship games. So history and health not on SMU's side, but I think I'm still a believer in the Mustangs. And Trig, if you're there, Your thoughts on backup quarterbacks in conference championship games and if there is an overreaction by the odds makers?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I can't believe SMU last week. I had Navy plus the points. I really thought they were just going to rest guys. And they're out there with a 4 touchdown lead in the second quarter and they get their quarterback hurt. It's just
Yeah.
it's wild that they even put themselves in that situation. But I kind of agree with you. I don't think there's a massive drop off there, and so I'm actually going to wait and see how this one's bet. I think I may lean toward the dog with you there as well. As you can hear, my dog's had a long day of shows. He's like, you know what? You guys have been on shows all day. I want to eat, but there's so many favorites in these games. BP, the dogs are going to eat a couple of them. This might be one of them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I cannot tell you what my power rating suggests this line should be if Preston Stone was in there, because I think people would throw me off Wager Talk. I think SMU is simply just a much better team than Tulane. With Preston Stone, he won't be there. They are high on this backup, Kevin Jennings, for the record. Okay, SEC, this is one of the big ones, Georgia and Alabama. This is just the second time, Trig, since 2010 that Bama is an underdog of 4 or more points. Nick Saban obviously carries a lot of respect in the marketplace. When was the last time that Alabama was an underdog of 4 or more points, you may ask? Well, it was a 2021 SEC Championship game against Georgia. They closed 6.5, plus 6.5 in that game. What did they do? They won outright. They needed that game to make the playoffs. Georgia didn't, if you remember. 3 previous times these teams have met in the SEC Championship, the overs hit all 3 times, and the dog took the cash. This is obviously one of the biggest games of the weekend. You have any thoughts there?
I'm watching the board as we're doing this show. 5.5s and 6s now, and this is another one where it looks like Georgia's going to take the money. It probably continues into the weekend. Is there a spot to buy in with Alabama? I mean, it would be hard. There's got to be a point where you have to consider the dog here in this game, and in just the matchup, the magnitude of the game, the thought that I don't know if Georgia's just invincible. Like they're kind of being made to feel that way. So it's certainly an interesting game at this point. Since I haven't bet it yet, I'm certainly not going to come in and take 6 with Georgia when I could have had 4. But I might take 6.5 or 7 with Alabama if that ends up being where it lands. Haven't made a decision here yet, but the dog is getting more and more intriguing as that Georgia money pours in.
Yeah, it's really interesting because a few weeks ago, you have to wonder if Georgia would not have been the public side here, because remember Georgia was struggling, but they were not covering. Now all of a sudden, they've gotten on a roll, whereas Alabama is coming off that miracle win in the Iron Bowl, and it feels like the values with Bama. Sun Belt, the Fun Belt, not a lot to offer here, but I will say this, Trig, for an interesting stat. Guess which conference produced the most bowl eligible teams this year? I'll give you a clue. It rhymes with Fun Belt. It was the Sun. The Sun Belt at 12. 12 teams were bowl eligible in this league.
They pulled off some nice non-conference wins, and there's a lot of quality teams in this league. One of them we alluded to in the last segment. South Alabama went and knocked off Oklahoma State. There's a number of good instances. I'm just escaping me off the top of my head, but this is an underrated league. I feel like you and I kind of talked about this on a weekly basis when we were doing our before match in Tuesdays. We were doing our Sun Belt CUSA, Tuesdays, and there's a lot of good teams in this league. So it doesn't surprise me. I wouldn't have had that off the top of my head, Brian, but it's not surprising to me at all because, these types of teams pick up a couple of wins over the big guys non-conference, and then it's not that hard to get to 6-6. So, it's again, maybe do we target Sun Belt teams come bowl season? I mean, they seem like they could be live and they could be dogs. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what you've wanted to target in the past in the ACC title game. And this is another one where the backup quarterback is obviously a massive part of the handicap. In the ACC championship game, favorites have won the last 11 and covered the last 6. But Florida State, the favorite here, they are a short favorite. Why? Jordan Travis is not playing. Tate Rodemaker got knocked out for a little bit last week against Florida, but the Noles did cover. Trig, What do you make of this? Florida State laying 2.5 to a Louisville team that could not have asked for a better ACC schedule had they gone to the ACC office before the season with a large bag of cash and said, please, ACC, give us the easiest schedule you could possibly have. They didn't play Florida State. They didn't play Clemson. They didn't play North Carolina.
Yeah, and they didn't have to open up their season in Central New York like they did last year, Brian, and got run out as 5-point favorites, lost by that game to Syracuse by 30. I'll tell you another one. You can't bet 2.5. I mean, it's just like you had a week to find, if you liked Louisville, you had a week or so to get in at 5, 5.5, 4, 4.5, and 3. So it's just irresponsible at this point, in my opinion, to come in and take 2.5. So you can only bet Florida State, or you have to leave it at this point. And you just have to ask yourself, is Florida State still worthy with their backup quarterback? And I would say probably. I mean, again, it's not, I don't know if I want to come back in here and play Florida State. They've been a team that I found myself opposing more than backing this year. There's the weird thing about them, and again, it probably doesn't come into play in a game where the spread is this short. But I talked about this earlier a few times. When they were a bigger favorite, they just had these lapses, and it's
Yes.
like it should have cost them at some point. And it does cost them covers. If you go through their sort of record this year, there's games where they've gotten out with wins, but it's cost them covers. I thought it was going to cost them one last week. It didn't. So again, it's one of those ones where I'm not going to argue with you. If you got in nice and early on Louisville and are sitting there with a nice 5.5, I think that's a good bet. But I think too much of the value is gone to justify taking Louisville now. So you'd have to either go the other way or just leave it alone.
All right, and we'll wrap it up with I think from a betting perspective is one of the more intriguing matchups of the weekend. You have this massive favorite in the Big Ten championship game, Michigan against Iowa. This is the 6th straight year, guys, where the Big Ten East champ is favored by at least 11 over the West Division champ. So I'm glad we're getting rid of divisions here. And by the way, those 5 previous wins by the Big Ten East champ, all by 12 or more points. One of those was Michigan crushing Iowa 2 years ago. As a matter of fact, the last 2 Big Ten championship games have been decided by a combined 59 points. But here's one for you, Trig. This is just the 27th game in college football history where you have a spread greater than 21 and the total is 40.5 or lower. It is going to be the lowest total for any conference championship game in history here. Obviously, no surprise with Iowa involved. Also not a surprise when we're hanging out in Boston together. There is a 100% chance I am going to bet this. Will Iowa score in either half situation? What a tremendous bet to get action. Did you see this? Total points over under a half has been listed for Iowa in both halves against the Wolverines.
That's insane. First of all, it makes me want. I mean, it makes me want to just like throw something on the over, thinking they'll like force a turnover and maybe get a field goal or something like that. But I think the better way to look at, like, I could see maybe like a first half under here. Like, I think that might be the better way to bet something like that, where if they're projecting like, I think I saw the first half as over under a half on DraftKings, which is just insane.
Yeah.
Reminds me of a game I went to last year. Went to the Army-Navy game with Newbie. Met him down in Philly. We went to Army-Navy, and there was similar under props in that game. And like, he basically, so shout out to Dan Alexander, one of our hosts. He basically ladder bet like every one of these under props, and he hit every single one until the game somehow ended up in overtime. I think he lost like the full game under. But the point is, like, early in this game, I mean, I was not going to be taking any chances. They're going to want to play field position. There might be a feeling out point where if you slice that number in half, looks low for the full game. But for the first half, might be a little bit better. I don't have the first half number in front of me right now, but if it's 35.5 for the game, what's the first half total? Like 16.5 or 17?
I'm bringing it up right now. The
Yeah,
first
I
half,
mean,
19 and a half.
okay, so it is a little higher. Yeah, so
Yeah,
19 and a half, first half under feels right here to me, Brian. I'm not a
yeah.
great totals better. I don't give many of them out, but this kind of feel like even if Michigan were dominant, like let's say like at worst 17-3, you lose it by a half, but like maybe it's 14-3, maybe it's 13-3, maybe it's 13-0, maybe it's 17-0 at half, right? And that first half under a half a point cashes. I just feel like there's far more paths to a first half under than like fireworks out of the gate, and you're just this just feels like a Iowa maybe has 3, Michigan maybe has like somewhere between 13 and 17. If that's the case, you're probably on the right side of that first half under. So that's the way I would look at this one.
We did it. 10 conference championship games. We said we would hit them all here today on The Hustle. He's Adam Trigger. I'm Brian Power. Remember, we currently have a special offer, 3-day all access. You can save $15 off that by using the coupon code 15OFF3. That's 150FF3 at checkout. That would cover you for all the conference championships and NFL. My NFL's been running pretty good. I had a nice 5% winner on the Bills on Sunday. Just cash trig by half a point. That was just had to sweat that one out for 3.5 hours.
Brian, that's why we sit here and stress the number. You can play it at some points, you can't play it at others. Like you got yourself a good number there, and it was a difference between a win or a push. So, or maybe even a loss. I don't know exactly what that went off, but
it closed at 2.5 when the Lane Johnson news was announced. So yeah, for sure. So busy weekend for both Trig and I, and guess what? We'll be hanging out together. So I will see you soon, buddy. We will be in Boston with Zeno, CT, and the crew. What a great time!
Yeah, if you're in Boston and you want to come chill with us for a while, I think we'll have a table in the book for like all day, basically. So come down, say hi. We're going to be at Encore Boston Harbor. It's always a good time. If you can't find us, just look for CT. He's going to probably be the loudest person in the place. So, so yeah, we'll be down there if you want to come hang out.
And I'm sure I will be forced to stand right next to him as always. But like I said, for Adam Trigger, I'm Brian Power. This was the Hustle Pod on a Tuesday. Until next time, let's cash the tickets.